Scott, you might be muted. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
I can hear you just fine. I'm sorry. I think there was a little
There
bit
we
of a glitch and delay in my video. Can you see me now? Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm sorry, I heard my name and I unclicked my button to turn my camera on and I didn't hear anything that was said after that. So thank you for re-summarizing what may have been said in my temporary absence. Of course, that'd be my pleasure. Let me click a couple of buttons to get my visuals up and we'll go from there. Not a problem at all. This is how we work. Okay, I'm sharing my screen now and I'll stand by for you to tell me that you can see my slides. Terrific. And now I'm moving to presentation view, so the slide should fill your screen. Or are you looking at my presenter's view?
We're seeing your presenter's view.
Thank you. I'll turn that around. Sometimes these platforms behave a little bit differently. Okay,
That looks
so how do
great,
we look
Scott.
now?
Looks great.
Terrific. Okay, thank you very much for having me this morning. I'm excited to be here. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a subject matter expert for Gallup, and it's going to be my pleasure this morning to walk you through a briefing on your engagement results and talk about some very specific recommendations that we might have to increase your engagement and thereby drive better outcomes for you. As we get going here, let's start with the agenda. I think we're going to follow this flow. And of course, this is subject to your approval and what you need. But we typically start off with just a little bit of information about current workplace trends from a high level, what Gallup knows about how engagement is moving in the workplace overall. And then we begin on your data. And we talk about key highlights from your data, and we look at the overall results, and then we take kind of an engagement deep dive into specific data sets that you may be fascinated to learn more about. We conclude with recommendations both at the organizational level and then also engagement item by engagement item. And so we have a list of recommendations in both categories. Excited to share all that with you. And then we'll conclude and wrap up with what our next steps might be. Any questions from the room? All right, when I solicit information from the room and there's silence, generally speaking, I'm going to interpret that as we're ready to go. And because we're on Teams and because you all are very small in a little box down here on my smaller monitor, I may not be able to see body language and furrowed brows and indications of confusion or excitement. So if you want to interrupt me, please do, but do so verbally, and I'll tap the brakes and we can stop and dwell wherever we need to. Just a quick level set, going back to information that you already have, but making sure that we're regrounded in it. Satisfaction is different from engagement. Engagement is all about working with passion and performing at high levels and giving that sort of discretionary effort that increases our outcomes, produces actual results. And so while you'll see satisfaction sort of denoted on our slides and all of that, it's very different than engagement. Engagement is what drives your outcomes. And that's why we focus on engagement rather than satisfaction. Remembering to define engagement very specifically and talk about its value. Engaged employees are the ones who show up and they're just enthusiastic about the workplace. They psychologically own and are committed to their jobs, and they drive performance and innovation, and they move the organization forward in meaningful ways. A quick recap of why engagement really matters with some numbers put to it. The reason that we focus on engagement and do things to drive engagement is because engagement drives those outcomes that I've been talking about. So what we've observed are some pretty startling differences in outcomes between what I'll call top quartile teams and bottom quartile teams. So if you compare the two, top quartile and bottom quartile in our database, the difference in outcomes is pretty startling with regard to things like absenteeism and safety and turnover, and even how you're rated by the citizenry and the customers who are your end users. Things like productivity. These are very specific benefits of engaging employees, and this is why we do what we do. Here's one more layer to that just for fun. It also has an impact on well-being. So when you look at highly engaged employees, we can actually document the fact that they have lower levels of stress, lower levels of anxiety and depression, and even lower levels of bad cholesterol. So doing this engagement thing is great for business outcomes, but it's also really, really good for employees and their supervisors and the leadership. So overall out there in the world, Gallup is tracking a little bit of a downtick in engagement overall, and I won't stay here long, but what you'll notice is that engagement is on the decline. And what we're seeing for every 1 percentage point drop, we're looking at about 1.6 million employees who are either engaged or not engaged. And if you look at that bottom line, those are percentages of actively disengaged employees. And we'll talk about who those people are and why it really matters. But one thing to know as we launch into the conversation is eliminating active disengagement is critically important because those actively disengaged employees actually account for a loss of about 1.9 trillion in the US economy nationwide. One of the things that I think relates specifically to your results when we get to your results is this idea of a decline or a flat line in expectations. And so all across the board right now, one of the things that we're noticing is we're hitting sort of historic 10-year lows in whether or not employees really know what's expected of them at work every day or not. And this one is really foundational. It's one of our basic needs that we want to make sure we're meeting. This visual will have kind of impact and relevance to the recommendations that you see at the end of the presentation for your results. And why it matters is because when employees don't know what's expected of them at work with crystal clear clarity, they also struggle to receive things like feedback. They also don't feel prepared to do their job. They don't know what they're expected to do, and they don't know what their coworkers are expected to do. And overall, they take a little bit of a dip in their overall well-being. So these are some of the reasons that that matters. So that's a little bit of a preamble leading right up to your specific results. So before I dig into your results, do you have any questions about anything I've shared with you so far? All right, we're just excited to see our own results. So let's get into that, Scott. Quick refresher, just in case anybody wants to ask any questions. These are the 12 elements of engagement. And the reason that there are only 12 as opposed to more is we've vetted each one of these items for several things. Number one, does it have a direct tie to performance? So if we ask a great question and it doesn't have a specific tie to a performance outcome, we throw that aside. It's got to have something that's directly related to measurable outcomes. And the second thing that the second filter through which these questions pass is the filter of, is this something that's actionable? Can managers actually do something about this? Are there specific actions that we can take to drive progress with regard to engagement for each one of these items? So that's how the items sorted in, and it's why the list is so short, because this is an action-packed, power-packed list of questions. And if you can get people to answer these consistently with fives, you're going to see results in your organization, and your managers will be able to drive all of these items with very clear, specific things that they can do and they are in charge of. Do you have any questions about any of these items, what it means, where it came from? Is there any of these that you want to press on before we reveal your results? No one wants to ask about that best friend question, huh? I get that one a lot.
I wanted to.
Okay, let's break the dam on that one. And maybe that leads to a great discussion of some of the other items too. That best friend question, we get peppered with that all the time. And Kayla and Coleman and I mean, if we were telling the truth between the three of us, you know, behind a closed door, we might actually say, gee, I wish we'd take that one out because it takes a long time to explain it because people always ask about it. People are a little skeptical because it feels a little fluffy. But here's the reason that we don't get rid of that item, because it's one of the strongest indicators of performance. So teams that answered that specific question worded exactly that way, high, tend to be high performing teams. Teams that answer low tend to be lower performing teams. And we tried every version of the wording you can imagine to make it not sound so weird and wonky. But when we changed the wording, that sorting effect diminished. So this is the most powerful wording that we came up with. This is the one that is the best predictor of performance, and that's why it survives as Q10 in the list. Any other questions? Any other items you want to press on a little bit? Okay, so as we go through your results and we look at Q10, if you have, kind of where the rubber meets the road, practical questions like, okay, Scott, I get why it's there, but my people are asking me about it. How do I explain it to them? Or when folks go to take the survey, they ask me about that question and I want to tee it up the right way for them. If you have those kinds of questions as we get into your results and the recommendations, please ask, because I can help you to navigate that question with employees, because they're going to ask about it too. Okay, so we're going to look at your data on the next slide, but here's what I pulled out of your data, just at a very, very high level. And I wanted to put this in front of you as a lens sort of to look through to simplify what you'll see on the next slide. So basic needs, we call that Q1 expectations and Q2 materials and equipment. From what I'm looking at, needs to be an immediate and intense continual focus. That's one thing that jumped out at me right away. Second thing that jumped out is your recognition score, Q4. It's a little bit higher, and it's starting to become a real strength for the organization. This item has really significant overlap and impact to other items too. So you should keep looking at it. You should keep leaning into it and focusing on it, because when you drive up that recognition score, it tends to be kind of a rising tide that lifts all boats. So you'll see what I mean when we get into your actual results. There's been a significant increase in Q11, and that's the item that says in the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. So that's good. But it's interesting to note that two items that are closely connected to that, Q6, someone at work encourages my development, and Q12, this last year I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. Those two items, which are associated and kind of connected, are flat. They're reasonably flat, no meaningful growth or decline. This could suggest, and this is a theory that we can test together when we have our conversation later about recommendations, that maybe manager conversations are a little bit more focused on looking backward on what has occurred and providing feedback, and maybe not quite as focused as they need to be on the future and where we go from here. That's just a theory, and we'll test it when we get into your data. Okay, without further ado, here's the first data slide that I have for you. This one is visually dense, so I'm going to walk you around this a little bit. I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner with your response rate. So the Gallup median response rate is 84%. In your first administration, I think you achieved 80%. In this administration, you achieved a 69%. And I'm aware that there are probably some factors influencing that depressed response rate, perhaps survey fatigue, maybe even a little bit of conflagration between two different surveys that were deployed kind of in the same time period, a little bit of confusion about which was which and were both required and that sort of thing. But your response rate is a little bit lower than usual. So there's an opportunity for improvement. Move just over to the right. Overall, your engagement mean, that means the overall average of all of your engagement items ticked up from 3.79 to 3.81. We wouldn't call that a significant increase, but it is an increase. So that's positive. Move one space over to the right, these top quartile teams. We're going to dig into this just a little bit. But right now you have a lower percentage of teams in that top quartile today than you did during your first administration. And on a subsequent slide, I'm going to kind of show you the breakdown of which teams are moving into which quartiles, and we're going to unpack that a little bit for more specificity. Now, if you come down a level, your company compared to other institutions, like institutions, governmental bodies, is in the 47th percentile. If you move one space over to the right, if you look at our overall database, that's not industry specific, just the entire database. For organizations your size, you would be in the 22nd percentile. So if you look down below, you see comparative strengths and opportunities. And where do we get that data? From the chart on the right. So the bar chart on the right just kind of shows you item by item by item, if you follow the columns, what your current average is, whether that average went up or down. And then you get your little bar chart that kind of shows you the color codes, and that shows you the percentile for each one of those items. And then, of course, there's a numerical indication off to the right that shows you which percentile you're in. All of that data kind of boils down and distills into the strengths and opportunities as they're listed in the lower left-hand corner. And so I'm going to let you stare at this for just a second, and I'm going to pause for any questions that you may have about this visualization. And then we're going to move forward and kind of unpack this data at a much more granular level.
And team, I will send the slideshow out after this. It's sometimes hard to read up on that screen.
Okay. From my information as the presenter, are you able to see the bigger and bolded numbers, or shall I do a little bit more narration as we go through?
I can see them.
I can see them. I don't have the best eyesight. I don't know about anybody else.
What I will do is take your verbal counsel. So if we're going through some of these data and text-rich slides, and the print is just a little bit too small for you, just tell me, and I'll narrate whatever sections you need me to narrate. This one's pretty easy to see. This is the engagement index. And so this shows you the ratio of engaged employees to not engaged employees to actively disengaged employees. And I don't know if it was shared with you or if you recall what that exactly means from your last administration, but I'm going to break it down for you with a metaphor that you can borrow. You can borrow this and you can use this as an efficient way to tell your employees about this ratio. If you imagine that everybody in a team is in a boat and they're rowing across a lake and they're trying to reach a specific dock on the opposite shore, you got some people in that boat who have their hands on the oars and they're pulling the water and they're doing it in unison and they're working hard and they got their eyes on that dock where they're trying to go and they're working together. These are your engaged employees. You've got other employees who are sitting in that boat who have their hands on the oars, but they're sort of slapping the water and they're not really paying attention to being in cadence with the other employees, and they might be kind of looking at the birds and the trees. I mean, they're there and they're kind of doing the work, but not really. Those are your not engaged employees. And then you've got a handful of employees, hopefully not too many, who are in the back of the boat and they've got a power drill and they're drilling holes in the bottom of the boat. And the worst part is they're tapping the people on the shoulder who are sitting in front of them and saying, hey, you ought to come back here and help us with this. This is really fun. These are your actively disengaged employees, and they are costing you time and energy and productivity. They're a big, big drain on your business results. So those are the three types of employees. And this visual kind of shows you how your organization breaks down. Now, Gallup does this thing called an engagement ratio. Yours is 2.7. That's 2.7 engaged employees to every one actively disengaged employee. And what we want to shoot for is a bare minimum. Just get to the threshold of 4-to-1. Because when you hit 4-to-1, things begin to accelerate. Things begin to feel different in the workplace. There's much more productivity. You see great business outcomes beginning to evolve at about a 4-to-1. For comparison, our best practice organizations, like our Gallup Great Workplace Award winners, they achieve 14-to-1 or better. So there's a lot of room to grow here with regard to your engagement ratio. Are there any questions about what this is or what it means?
Would you say this is typical of medium-sized governments?
I would say this is in the ballpark. It's a little lower than you want to be. If I were just to give you a thumbnail of where you sit compared to like organizations, I'd say you're on probably the lower end of what I would expect to see.
And do you know how this compares to last year?
This, in some ways, yes. Let me go to the next slide and I'll kind of give you actually, do I have this for last year?
Scott, this is Kayla.
Kayla, do you know?
I can, not off the top of my head, but while you continue, I can go ahead and
Sure.
look that up and we can revisit that question if that's okay.
I appreciate that, Kayla. Okay, so we're going to get back to you. We're going to put a pin in that for just a second. Kayla, when you have it, why don't you interrupt me? Because on the next slide, I'm going to go through a little bit more information, but it's not backward looking to last year.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, so due to the size of your organization, I think we surveyed 183 people, got 183 returns on the survey. We didn't have the requisite N sizes to show you bar graph data for a lot of the subgroups and cuts. So what I did is I went through the cuts that we had available, and I just pulled out a couple of highlights. So here's the first highlight. If you're looking at the engagement index, that's that ratio of engaged to not engaged to actively disengaged. You look at it by generation. We need certain numerical thresholds in order to say what the comparative numbers are between those three groups. But we did have enough information to say Generation X employees, about 46% of them are engaged. I can't give you the not engaged and the actively disengaged because of the N size, but that means your Generation X employees, in terms of the percentage of them that are employed, that's the 68th percentile in the comparative database, and that's government organizations. 41% of your millennials are engaged by comparison, so that's only the 28th percentile. So there's a little bit of depression there in terms of millennial engagement. Not atypical. We see that fairly frequently. We had insufficient data for traditionalist and Gen Z employees to tell you what the percentages and ratios would be. Although when we get to those generations and we show the graphics that give you the delta between past administration and current administration, we are going to be able to show you some information about the traditionalist and Gen Z employees and their state of engagement right now as compared to last year overall. So we will get there in just a minute. We'll give you some data on those groups. Among your individual contributors, these are non-supervisory personnel who are just roll up their sleeves, get the work done types. 34% of them are engaged, 52% are not engaged, and 14% are actively disengaged. So here we had enough information to get that engagement ratio, and it is 2.4 to 1. So slightly lower than the organization as a whole, which was at 2.7 to 1. Your individual contributors are slightly less engaged, which means their supervisors and managers and leaders are slightly more engaged, and that's where that number gets pulled up a little bit for the total organization. One more thing that I noticed when I was looking at your data is something a little bit unusual. This is atypical. Your employees with 10 plus years of tenure are slightly more engaged than the other groups that we had sufficient data to measure. That is unusual. And so there's something really positive going on there with your more tenured employees. I'm anxious to talk about it with you and to kind of discover what you think is going on there and give some recommendations to keep that inertia going. Okay, so now we're going to move into some other cuts. We actually have a lot of data to look at, so bear with me. We're going to move through things quickly. When you look at a slide like this, it can be a little bit of an eye chart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some red squares up on the screen to kind of focus your attention where I'm looking. Here's the purpose of this visualization. So if I'm a leader in an organization, one of the pieces of low-hanging fruit for me is to figure out where are people either disagreeing, which is the orange color, or strongly disagreeing with each one of these items, because the people who disagree with the item with that level of intensity, if I can move them up, if I can get them to agree, if I can shift them over to the right a little bit on that Likert scale, it has pretty profound impact on the overall scores. So the first thing that I would point to is recognition, which, by the way, in your organization is a comparative strength. You're in the 62nd percentile, which is terrific. Your engagement or your mean on this item rose 12 1/100ths of a point, which we wouldn't call significant, but it's an increase. It's a kind of a notable increase. So it's not that you're doing poorly on recognition, but look at how many employees would disagree or strongly disagree with that item. Strong disagreement is 11%. Disagreement is 14%. This is an area of opportunity. So I would focus some attention on the recognition item. Oops, let's hit the right button here. All right, the next thing I'd look at is probably opinions count. This is another one where you're in the 58th percentile, which is terrific. Kind of flat, 6 1/100ths of a tense decline. It's not really significant. But look at the number or the percentage of employees that disagree or strongly disagree with this item. There's some low-hanging fruit there. If you can move those people over a little bit to the right, you get some rapid results. By the way, opinions count is also one of those rising tides that lifts all boats. When people feel like their opinions at work seem to count, it elevates their responses, oftentimes to other items. And then I put some time and attention into this. Let's start with progress. Actually go to Q11 first. You had a terrific bump here. So I'm excited to hear, maybe before I even go to the next slide, what's happening here with your progress item. That somebody has talked to me about my progress in the last 6 months. You had 21 100ths of a point boost, which is terrific. That puts you in the 64th percentile. Yet you've got 8% who strongly disagree and 10% who disagree with that item. So again, low hanging fruit to pick. Now let's go down to best friend. Just below it, there's a lot of opportunity here. The one thing I'm going to caution you about with regard to best friend is we talked about the value and the power of this item. Be very careful in how you address this item with your overall organization. Some of our clients target best friend because it seems like the right thing to do for whatever reason. And if you're talking to employees about why they should have a best friend at work and what that means, you know, those close supportive relationships, and you're focusing your time and attention on that when they don't have the materials and equipment that they need to do their job every day, or they're unclear about what their job is every day, if they're struggling down here at the base of the hierarchy and you're trying to have conversations about something near the top of the hierarchy, sometimes those conversations can feel a little bit disingenuine, fluffy, not connected to what they care about. So be very careful when you address the best friend question. Now, before I go on to the next slide, this is my first opportunity to ask the room. Great results on Q11, a really solid bump. To what would you attribute that gain? What's going on that seems to maybe have some impact on the elevation of that number?
I mean, I'll answer, but I don't think that, I don't know how many people in my department did this survey, and we're tiny. I meet with everybody. I have a lot of meetings, basically, lots and lots of student meetings. But some of it is just because people need constant feedback or constant attention, and so I try to make it a point to give them that. I don't know. I have a feeling that my people aren't the ones that bump that number, but that's what we're doing.
I'd love to hear their thoughts in the room, but as people are thinking their thoughts, I want to appreciate and validate what you said. The frequency of meetings is one of the most important things that you can do, just the cadence. Our chairman, Jim Clifton, asked our chief scientist not too long ago, Jim Harder, hey, Jim, if there's one thing you could do to boost employee engagement, you can only pull one lever. Which lever would you pull? And Jim Harder said, have one meaningful conversation each week with every employee. It has to do with the frequency and the cadence of it and whether or not the employee feels it's meaningful. That's maybe the single biggest driver of engagement there is. So congratulations on that. If that's what you're doing, this could be one of the places it's paying off. Other thoughts in the room?
I don't have an additional thought, Scott, but if we're able to backtrack for a moment to the engagement ratio, I do have last year's comparative data pulled up.
Thank you, Kayla. If there aren't any other thoughts in the room on Q11, let's let Kayla interrupt us long enough to say, compared to a 2.7 to 1 this year on the org-wide engagement ratio, and I'll go back to that slide so you can remember what we're talking about. Kayla, where were we last year?
We were at a 2.1 to 1 ratio.
Significant progress.
And I can share details on, so we had 38% engaged, so that green category stayed about the same at 38%. The yellow folks in that not engaged group, last year we were at 44%. So now we're at 48. And then our actively disengaged last year was at 18%, and now we're at 14.
Congratulations to the organization. That's significant improvement. That's significant delta year 1 to year 2. Thank you, Kayla.
Yep, thanks, Scott.
Just 4%.
All right, let's get us back to where we were. Fast forward to here. Okay, we've talked about this slide, and unless there's something else here, remember this is your low-hanging fruit slide. I'm going to move us forward to leadership. Let's talk about leadership and managers. A couple of things visually on this slide. The first thing that I'll point to is an interesting sort of offset between executive engagement, which traveled 24 hundredths south, and supervisor level engagement, which overall traveled 21 hundredths north, kind of offsetting each other just a little bit. So over on the right-hand side, you can see the percentiles, and we're looking again at the company as compared to government, local, city, county organizations there on the left, and then the overall database on the right. That's what all those colored boxes are over there. Over here on the left, just one thing to note is as you move from the executive level to the supervisor level, engagement goes down by 9 hundredths of a point. That's what that little arrow there means. And so you see sort of the cascade effect from executive to supervisor to individual contributor and how those levels of engagement kind of decrease as we go along. One thing to pay attention to that's really important, this will be a theme that kind of recurs throughout the organization. If you're going to boil it down to essence, highly engaged managers have more engaged teams. So the engagement level of the manager, meaning the team leader, is critically important because as the team leader's engagement rises, so does the engagement of the overall team. And so it's critically important to kind of understand that dynamic. Let's go a little bit deeper into this data. So this is a little bit of a breakdown through the executive, supervisor, and individual contributor levels of what engagement sort of looks like. So I'm going to start off with a couple of things that jumped out at me. If you're looking at the executive group, this is a pretty notable increase, 31 hundredths increase in best friend. And if I were to say what that typically really is, it's close supportive relationships. People are saying, hey, look, I've got close supportive relationships at work, which for an executive leadership group is pretty important. I also noticed in the executive group, significant uptick in, hey, somebody at work seems to care about me as a person. That's related in some ways. And so there seems to be, relationally speaking, some great gains that are taking place within the executive group. As I move over to the supervisor group, you're going to notice that all the arrows that are bolded, all the ones that are meaningful change are all going up. So there's kind of this rising tide among all of the items, a bunch of the items that are floating up the overall results. And if you look at the arrows in the supervisor column and you kind of compare them to the arrows in the executive column, you can see where things are moving up and down. There's some turbulence there in the executive group. So some things that are going up, other things that are going down, and comparatively to the supervisor group, a little less stability in the results. But this is a comparative between those two leadership groups. Any questions about this? Any thoughts on this from the group?
Scott,
Scott, this is.
Oh,
I was going to read a couple questions in the chat, but I can let whoever in the room go first as well.
Kayla, I will answer Marlene's question. The executive leadership in this is the leadership team, and that's at the executive leadership team. And then it rolls up to the elected officials. And so with supervisors, those are gonna be sometimes your managers and sometimes your supervisors, depending upon how many layers in your department you may have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So thank you for the answer in the room. I really appreciate that. And Kayla, thank you for watching the chat. In this view, I don't really have eyes on the chat. So Kayla, if you see something pop in there, just interrupt me and say, hey, Scott, we had a question in the chat. We'll tackle it, okay?
Absolutely.
Then moving us forward, let's look at teams all together. So these are the work groups that we looked at in your organization. We've got another circle graph here. This one means something a little bit different. So the green color, that is the percentages of, or the percentage of your teams that we looked at that meaningfully improved. Their engagement got better. The yellow color, that sort of taupe flesh colored color, that is the percentage of teams that did not change. They sort of stayed the same. And then that orange color is the percentage of your teams that actually had a meaningful decrease in their overall engagement. So you can see the number's pretty significant there, 22, 22, and 56. 56% of the teams actually showing a little bit of backward momentum. Now, if you look off to the right and you look down to the bottom of the page, when I look at this, there's so much data. I tend to focus on top quartile, bottom quartile, because if you remember when I showed you that chart that kind of said, okay, for productivity and absenteeism and safety, the big startling differences between those outcomes, it was the comparison between top quartile, which would be here, and bottom quartile, which is on the other end of the chart. So if you kind of look there, you see some startling differences from last year. Let's start with that group, that far right group that's 90th, right? So if you're looking at 90th percentile, in your past administration, 44% of your teams were there. Current administration, 14% of your teams are there. If you look one column to the left, 75th to 90th. You've got 11% of your teams in the first administration that were in this category, and a little bit more in terms of percentage in this administration of 14%. So that gives you a picture of the top end. Now, if you look at the other end of the spectrum, 28% of your teams were in the bottom quartile last time, 43% this time. So you've got a lot of teams kind of moving out of the middle, and the ones that are moving out of the middle tend to be migrating toward that bottom quartile, which is a trend that we definitely want to reverse. So what do we do with this information, practically speaking? Well, we got to figure out where to put our attention. And so there's some key places to put your attention, and that's what this visualization is kind of about. What you're looking at here, just focus on the percentages along the bottom row there. These are the percentages of teams that are below the 50th percentile in each one of these elements. So for example, if you look at Q3, I have the opportunity to do what I do best. 60% of the teams that we measured are below the 50th percentile. This is a critical mass. This is an area where you want to pay a little bit of attention. You want to dial in a little bit, because if you can move those teams from bottom quartile toward the top quartile, that's what gets you those great business outcomes. I'd also put some time and attention here. Q6 development. Somebody cares about my development. Q7, my opinions seem to count. Those are two areas where I would spend some time and attention, because you've got 57 and 58% of your teams respectively below the 50th percentile. And this one merits a little bit of attention too, this quality item. And I have an entire page worth of recommendations for you to consider around quality. You're going to see that near the end of the presentation. Just wanted to let you know it's coming, and this is definitely a place that I would zoom in. I'll land on this one. This Q12 Learn and Grow. This past year, I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. 58% of your teams are below the 50th percentile. Now, before we dig into some of these more granular cuts, tenure, age, ethnicity, all of those sorts of things, I'll pause again for any questions, anything that you want to talk about before we kind of move into the next chapter. The next several slides, we have much more granular data. This is engagement mean by ethnicity. And you can see that N sizes are so low, we don't have information to share on all of the different subgroups. But one thing we can say is that among whites in the organization, engagement's at the 54th percentile, which is strong. We don't have information from last year, so we can't do the delta, but we do know based on the 3.19 among the 10 Hispanic respondents that their level of engagement as a subgroup is in the first percentile. So there's something to study here, something to get curious about, something to approach with the right kinds of questions that will help you discover how to meaningfully change that number. By generation. So looking at generation, I was a little bit surprised to see this. Generation Z's overall engagement tends to be comparatively low. But here we've got 7 respondents. There was a very meaningful decrease in the overall engagement of this group, although it's not a big group. And so there's a lot of different things that can impact that number. For example, turnover within that group. You have different humans taking the survey this year, that sort of thing. But this is something to pay attention to, get curious about, and find out if there are specific things that can be done to boost the engagement of Gen Z compared to the other generations. So if you look at the percentile numbers kind of in the middle there, that's where I tend to go first. That's where my eyes tend to go first. And again, Gen Z is a fairly small group of respondents, but still something to get curious about and understand. Tenure. I mentioned earlier that this kind of surprises me a little bit because it's not something we see very often. But those employees who have 10 years plus, their engagement rose pretty sharply overall, which is exciting. And just like I said on the previous slide, something to get curious about. What's working there? Now, sometimes people will say, why are tenured associates or employees typically a little bit less engaged? Well, the overall trend line, if you look at trend lines across all of our data, is that lightly tenured employees who are kind of new to the organization, who have just been onboarded, they tend to have higher engagement. And as the years go by, the more tenure elapses, the lower and lower, and that engagement number tends to go for a variety of reasons. One of them is a lot of those tenured employees have been around so long that they kind of know all the things, don't really see paths to development. Sometimes they're closing in, maybe on end of career and things like that. So maybe a little bit less motivated to learn and grow and do things like that, just generally speaking. So to see your tenured employees bounce like this is pretty encouraging. From the room, is there anything that you might be able to tell me as an observer as to what's working here? What's driving that number?
The only thing I can think of is, I'm in the DA's office and I've got a couple of pretty tenured people, but there's not much room for movement. I mean, you just kind of, when you've got 4 people, only one can be in the top spot. But we noticed some things this last year. So my office manager is actually hitting her 25th anniversary. And then I have a legal assistant who just hit her 15th anniversary. And so I've been working toward trying to get my office manager to give my legal assistant more of her tasks, with the idea that maybe she's more of an assistant office manager. Not that I have that position set, but just trying to also, like, we had an incident, well, it wasn't an incident, but my office manager needed to be out for an extended period of time. So I needed my legal assistant to be able to step in and, the 15-year person be able to step in and handle a lot of that. And the two of us were flying by the seat of our pants, trying to learn, working with other department directors to figure out how to do the office manager's job. So since then, we've been really working toward, since the office manager returned to work, we've been really working toward a plan to make sure that, for not just for those two, but for the whole office, so that when somebody who primarily handles one task, that person is out, that there's someone else that can fill in. So we're trying to cross-train and things like that, to try to make sure that people have those opportunities and are being recognized for doing a good job when they do it. That's the only experience I've got. I don't know if that has helped, but.
That sounds really strong and really positive. So here's what I heard: themes of learning and growing and figuring out new roles, collaborative sharing of responsibilities, maybe some mentorship in there. These are all things that can drive engagement among your most tenured employees. So that's fantastic. That could be partially behind what's in some of these numbers. And when we get to the departmental breakdown, we'll be able to see with a little bit more granularity. But those are all strong contributors to engagement of more tenured associates. Thank you. Okay, moving into departments. So again, you see some of these columns are unpopulated just because the n size, we didn't have the requisite number of responses. But I tend, when I look at these department bars, I tend to look for where are things really happening? Like where are some areas in the organization where there's growth occurring? so that we can get curious about what's happening in these areas and say, what are they doing? And how can we borrow some of the best practices that are driving those numbers up to other departments? How can we learn from each other? How can we begin to sort of amplify our own engagement by borrowing best practices? So I'm looking here at the far left here is sheriffs at the jail. That's a meaningful increase. It's small in size of 7, but still that's a really good boost in the numbers. We got a team over here to the right, parks, operations, a 6,200ths point increase. It's very significant. If I were in organizational leadership, I would probably ring some phones and ask some questions and figure out what's going on over there that we could borrow across other departments. Kind of scanning through the rest of the departments here. Some great movement right here. Public Works, road maintenance. And we've got a little bit of opportunity over in information services. You can see that off to the right. And here, this isn't a meaningful increase, but I want to point to it because this group right here at the treasurer's office, it's an N size of 4, very small group, but you're in the 98th percentile. Congratulations, that's terrific. So as you approach the 100th percentile, meaningful growth can be something like, 10 100ths of a point. That's significant when you're near the top of the stack. And then off to the left, you see the DCD building. It's an N size of 5, but it might be worth asking some questions about what's driving that fairly significant decrease on a small team, making sure we understand what's going on there. Continuing our survey, a couple of things to point to here. With Barview County Park, congratulations on a great boost. HHSA has got a great boost of 38 100ths. That's terrific. And on the far left, we see the Department of Community Development with a little bit of an opportunity, something we might want to dig into a little bit, especially because the in size of that group is 13. So thinking about those mean changes, there were a lot of unpopulated columns. So there were some slides that didn't have a whole lot of data on them. So I decided to just sort of boil it down to essence. So I didn't drag you through another 8 unpopulated slides by role. So we're talking about by job function, by role here. The accounting technician role increased from 3.79 to 4.23. That's a gain of 44 100ths and puts them in the 97th percentile. Congratulations on the increase and also on your performance overall. Corrections deputy increased from 277 to 322. That's a great boost, 45 100ths of a point. Still in the first percentile, so lots of opportunity there, but also some positive development in terms of the number floating up, which is terrific. So thinking about departments and thinking about the limited information that we have here on screen related to roles. What catches your attention? What makes you curious? What surprises you? And tell me if you want me to scroll back to some of those slides if you need to look at them again.
Scott, one of the observations I've had is that we've already hired 50 employees this year. So even though we're asking the same questions, it's possible we're not asking the same people.
Right.
As we start looking at shifting from year to year. So if we have a department that is stationary and they haven't had any turnover, you could count on that. But if you've shifted out 3 employees and brought in 3 employees, you're not necessarily sampling the same experience of the individuals.
I think that's a really great observation. Absolutely correct. And it kind of plays into some other dynamics of, we'll call it the employee experience, the employee life cycle. What we often find is that organizations who are struggling with active disengagements, they have a lot of actively disengaged employees. They'll turn to us for advice and counsel. And often one of the things that we say to them is it's a little bit painful to hear, but your actively disengaged employees, for example, they tend to overconsume the manager's time. They need a lot of time and attention. They're squeaky wheels and they create all kinds of swirl in the organization. One of the healthier things that can happen is the natural or assisted attrition of those people. And so what winds up happening is these actively disengaged employees on their own, or maybe with a little bit of help, wind up leaving the organization. And as you rehire others to kind of backfill those positions, your engagement can naturally float up as you hire well to replace people with very low engagement with people who coming through the door will be onboarded correctly and have that good initial boost of engagement from the onboarding program. That can actually create some pretty good improvements in your engagement scores overall. But your point's well taken. And what you're looking at is the numbers floating up or staying flat or floating down. And hopefully that churn that you're describing promotes a rise in your engagement numbers. Great observation. Any others?
I would say some of the large changes, both up and down, have come in departments with some change in leadership. So I think there's definitely something to look at in those as well.
Completely agree. The manager's impact or the team leader's impact overall on engagement is profound. And when leadership changes, absolutely you would expect some turbulence in the numbers. Okay, I'll keep us rolling here. This is employment status, and I think it's really interesting because I see a lot of kind of contradictory data points here. So if you look at the employment status, exempt on the left, non-exempt on the right, and the colored bars in the middle sort of show you which direction the intensity is greater, either to the left toward exempt or to the right toward non-exempt. And most of the bars are going to the left toward exempt. And so a couple of things that caught my attention here. First of all, you've got this learn and grow item, this Q12, which is much stronger at 4.06 for the exempt. And at the same time, it declined by 0.21, 0.2 of a point. Another thing that caught my attention was this. Got some downward movement in opinions and development. And though they're both stronger among exempt, the trend is for those to be declining among the exempt, where they're kind of flat for the non-exempt. So there's some downward movement there. Even though the overall numbers are stronger on the left, they're declining. So it would be interesting to kind of dig into that among your exempt employees and figure out what's driving that movement. And then down here, here's a nice boost. Materials and equipment, it's stronger among exempt than non-exempt, but rising at a good clip, 0.31 of a point is the delta from the last administration to this administration. So there's something to point to and just say, hey, there's something here that's working well. What's driving that number? Questions or responses on this slide? Okay, let's take a look at the right. There isn't much over here in terms of rightward lean in the numbers, but this is one place where we've got a great boost of 0.23 with regard to progress. Somebody's talked to me about my progress in the last 6 months. So when we looked at the overall results on the very first slide, we saw that really great boost in Q11. This is a big part of it right here, being driven by non-exempt employees. Okay, back to generations. On this one, I don't think I'm going to color code any boxes. I think I'm just going to let you stare at it for a minute. I would encourage you to look first at the baby boomers and then kind of work your way to the right. What is it that you notice here? When you look at the generations, one by one by one, what stands out to you? What surprises you?
Generation Z is going downhill.
That's a nice summary of what we see there in the far right column. Yeah, that's the first thing that jumped out at me too. Although there's a couple of, areas of bright sunshine. So we've got an interesting counter trend on that Q9 quality item, which isn't necessarily a strength of the overall organization, but a pretty nice boost there for Generation Z from admin 1 to admin 2. And then we've also got kind of a nice upward trend on materials and equipment. which is super. And you see, move one column to the left from Gen Z, and millennials rated that item 2,200s lower. So comparatively, Gen Z's got something going on there. But yeah, Gen Z's kind of tough. It's kind of tough. There's a lot to dig into. There's a lot of questions to ask. It's a small n size, but those are pretty consistent areas of intensity in terms of downward momentum. What else stands out to you?
Millennials have best friends.
Strong, supportive relationships in the workplace. Nice uptick there for Gen Xers like me on the best friend item, even though Gen Z's a little light, you know, being there in the, whatever that is, 24th percentile or less, but there's a nice uptick. I was a little surprised by the baby boomers. So these are pretty strong positive gains, pretty strong positive numbers. I think I mentioned this before, but more tenured associates and also older generations, there tends to be a trail off with regard to engagement. But something is happening here in your organization where your older generations and your more tenured employees are getting really good results and rising results in their engagement scores. So that's something that's unique in your organization, something to diagnose, figure out what's going on there, and replicate. Okay, a couple more slides and then we're going to do some recommendations. So this is engagement by tenure. It's the same thing in that trend line that I was just describing. Usually that thing just kind of keeps going down like a staircase over time. That's not the case here. But when I look at this chart, there's a couple of places that my eyes are drawn to. First of all, wow, look at these less than 1 year tenured associates. Not atypical. These are usually the people who just got here. They came to your organization for a reason. They were accepted. Now they're employees. They're being onboarded. They're learning and growing and going through all of that stuff. So there tends to be some intensity here, and that bears itself out in your results. And then I start to look, I think, at the darkest colors on the chart, and I try to look at places where there's one of these tenure bands that is kind of outperforming all of the others. And that's a place I want to put my attention and my energy and do some diagnosis. So here, under Learn and Grow, this is not unexpected. I mean, these people just got here and they're going through their onboarding and they're probably in many cases younger in their careers. They're learning and growing a lot. So this is an area of intensity that's just natural. And then here's a little bit of strength that we see through the early tenure bands on progress. We saw that great boost in Q11 on the initial screen. Well, the generation or the tenure bands that are really driving that are people who just got here all the way up to about 5 years. And then it sort of trails off after that. So it'd be interesting to know how you can continue that momentum. When people reach about the 5-year threshold, what can you do to reinvigorate their sense that people are talking to them about their progress and fostering their progress? Then I look over here and I see a great example of people who are in that top tenure band displayed on screen who are kind of outperforming everybody else with regard to best friend. That's kind of interesting. What's happening there? Those social relationships, how are those being fostered, particularly by managers and leaders who may be creating environments for those relationships to grow and thrive? All right, so it's time, unless there are objections, for me to say what I would recommend that maybe you focus on based on your overall results. As we get into this, I'm going to give you recommendations kind of at 2 levels. The first set of recommendations that are going to populate on this slide, this is for the whole organization. This is like as an organization, what do we do? What do we focus on? Then after we finish with this slide, I'm going to go through your specific areas of opportunity, and I'm going to try to be as practical as possible and give you several recommendations and probably highlight a few of those to make sure you know where to focus your attention first. But if I were advising the entire organization, my first recommendation would be to start at the bottom of the hierarchy. You know how the Q12 items are arranged from, Q1 way down here all the way up to Q12 way up here? Well, it's a hierarchy. And you always want to make sure that the base of your hierarchy is shored up and solid. It's like the foundation to a house. You want that foundation solid before you start building the walls, because if your foundation isn't solid, you put the walls on it, it starts to crack, things start to fall apart. One of the things that I liken it to is a game of Jenga. Anybody in the room ever played Jenga, where you take the little cubes and you kind of push them out. You try not to let the tower fall. Sometimes when we start diverting our attention too early to the items further up the hierarchy, your tower gets a little top heavy and it tends to want to topple over a little bit. That's like the thing I was saying earlier when people are talking about Q10 and they really want to be talking about materials and equipment. It just doesn't resonate with them. So I would recommend to your organization, set and pursue a goal of achieving the 75th percentile in both Q1 and Q2. That doesn't mean to the extreme exclusion of everything else. But as you work on items in the hierarchy, try to draw your eyes down more to the items lower on the hierarchy, and whatever you're focused on, whatever else you're focused on, keep investing as hard as you can in Q1 and Q2, the basic needs that will pay big dividends. It'll amplify the other things that you're doing. The second thing I would do in your organization is lean into recognition. Something's working. You see your results are strong and there's a little bit of an uptick in recognition. And this is one of those rising tide lifts all boats sorts of things. So really specifically, I would invest some time and energy in teaching managers how to give recognition and to give it consistently. So part of that is getting your managers to really understand how the people on their teams like to be recognized. So a quick example of that, I'm going to use myself as an example because I know myself pretty well and I'm pretty easy as an example. I am high in what Gallup would call the Clifton Strengths theme of responsibility, which means I take extreme psychological ownership of the things that I commit to. If I make a promise, I am absolutely going to keep it. That's part of me. It's part of my talent DNA as measured by Gallup. Well, a guy like me, a little bit of recognition is fine. Like if you want to give me a clap on the shoulder and say, hey, you knocked it out of the park today, great. I feel good about that. But if you want to put me on a stage and give me a trophy in a bright spotlight, I get kind of uncomfortable because that feels disingenuous. It feels false because I said I was going to do it. Of course I did it. And when you make more of a big deal about it than I really want you to, the recognition doesn't land the way you want it to. So teaching managers how to individualize the recognition to each of their teammates based on what those teammates actually prefer, that's a big deal. I'd highly recommend investing some time and attention in that. Teach managers to make recognition either a formal or an informal part of literally every call and every conversation they're on. Don't get off the call without delivering some sort of big or small or formal or informal recognition. It pays huge dividends. I would also make sure, and this is maybe the most important of the three recommendations, that every person in the organization understands the value of recognition and feels personally responsible for giving it, not just from leadership to managers to employees, but employees recognizing their peers, managers recognizing their peers, leaders recognizing their peers, all up and down the chain. That makes it pervasive. And this one is really critical. The biggest opportunity of them all, if I had to pull one lever in the organization, it might be to upskill managers to have better conversations. And we hit this theme earlier. Frequency is a big deal. Just increasing the frequency of conversations will boost engagement. And then make those conversations that you're already having anyway, make them meaningful. And this is so hard, but so many managerial conversations tend to be transactional. Here's the work. Here's what we've gotten done this week. Here's what we're doing next. TikTok, and now I got to move on to the next call. If you can take just the seconds that it takes in any managerial coaching conversation to make that conversation more meaningful to the employee, it will pay huge dividends. And sometimes that means depends on the employee. Sometimes they want you to ask them about their family. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they want you to contextualize something that occurred to them, make sense out of something that happened at work that they're confused about. Sometimes it's that. That's meaningful. There can be all different kinds of meaningful things, but teaching managers how to have meaningful conversations, what they mean, and why to have those meaningful conversations doesn't cost the manager more minutes. It takes the same amount of minutes and pays dividends with regard to engagement. Another thing I noticed in your results, I have this theory that maybe some of the conversations that are happening are very transactional and maybe backward looking, where we're diagnosing what happened. How do we prevent that? Did we clean up the mess? How did it come out? But never quite pivoting to the coaching aspect would be, okay, what do we do next time this happens? Or how do we prevent that from happening again? Or, hey, we had this great success. How do we replicate it? So that pivot to the forward look is also a big deal. And teaching managers how to do all this stuff is really critical. Organizational recommendations here at a very, very high level. Before I get into the ones that are specific to your engagement items, are there any questions? Or are there any of these that you need for me to unpack a little bit more specifically? I'd even take it if somebody wanted to give me a little counter pressure on one and say, that one doesn't seem very important to me, Scott, why? I will move us to, oh, by the way, don't forget this one, Q10. We talked about how we don't want to overemphasize it until we're starting to approach the 75th percentile on those basics and some of those individual and some of those other teamwork items. But look for organic, natural ways to promote close supportive relationships between employees. And I have a whole screen on Q10. I'm going to unpack that a little bit for you. But at an organizational level, that's just something to keep an eye on. How do we create those moments naturally, organically? Don't force them. All right, let's start at the bottom of the hierarchy with our engagement specific recommendations. One of your opportunities is to shore up, I know what's expected of me at work. And so there's some pretty specific things here on screen. Some of these may be immediately relevant. Some of them may not be. But one of the biggest parts of this, knowing what's expected of me at work, is understanding that when an employee has a job description, it's not sufficient. That job description has to be contextualized against what's happening every single day. That's where the managerial coaching conversations come in, because a manager takes that job description, those written expectations, and sort of brings it to life and gives it color and flavor and specificity based on what's happening right now this week. So the role of the manager in bringing that job description and those expectations to life is really important. But then you have to kind of rise up a level. In order for employees to understand what's expected of them at work with the best clarity, they also have to understand what's expected at work of all of the people in the constellation with whom they collaborate and work. And so having conversations that rise up from the individual to the interplay of individuals within an organization, so that I have greater clarity about the expectations that each one of those people that I interface with during the day, that drives this number up significantly. So elevating the conversation is really important. And some of the other recommendations under equip and expect managers to, that just gets back to the point of the critical importance of helping managers to be the fulcrum of a lot of these things. I'm going to move on to Q2, materials and equipment. So there's several recommendations here on screen. The nutshell of all of this is proactivity. Don't wait for people to come to you and say, I need this. Although when they do, make sure they can do it easily and that they are heard. Very, very important. But with materials and equipment, be looking forward. Put somebody in charge of knowing when it's time to upgrade the software, knowing when a tool has become obsolete, knowing when there's something new on the market that will help you with your job, looking forward and making sure that those things are allocated within the budget. So having somebody in charge of that's very, very important. There's a lot of other things on here that I think are kind of interesting. Sometimes it's not about what they have, but the version of it that they have. So investing in ergonomic tools and equipment that make people more comfortable to improve the safety of the work environment. That's a very specific thing that you can do to begin to move Q2. But not staring at these specific bullets, another thing to remember is with regard to materials and equipment, sometimes it's about hardware, sometimes it's about software, and sometimes it's about humanware. And so I know that yours is an organization that is struggling right now with a little bit of burnout. People are doing an awful lot right now and feeling a little stretched. And sometimes that humanware aspect of it, the feeling like we may be understaffed, even if it's just a perception, can strongly contribute to Q2 measuring a little bit lower. And so part of the conversation here on Q2 is helping everyone to understand that we are doing everything we can do as an organization to make sure that we have adequate hands on deck and that we are preparing people to do and share that work. And advertising that, trumpeting it, playing it up, and making sure people know how hard we're working to make sure that we've got the hands to do the work is something important that helps to drive Q2. Even though it says materials and equipment, sometimes that's the humanware aspect of things. I'm going to move us to Q3. At work, I just get to do what I do best every day. Isn't that great? One of the biggest keys to this is helping employees to know accurately what they do best at work. You'd be shocked how many employees that we talk to who think they're really great at something and comparatively they're just not. So one of the biggest things to do is help them really get a crystal clear sense of what they're actually good at compared to other people. And that could be a ton of different things. At Gallup, we use the Clifton Strengths Assessment, and that tells every person what they're uniquely gifted in terms of their naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior, and how those can be productively applied. Or you can start to experiment with things like stretch assignments, job shadowing, establishing new partnerships where people get to work together, where you can do something to give employees and their managers an accurate sense of what they really do better than other people. Also take a look at your performance management system. So thinking about that, you'll get a pretty clear indication of what's working really well for you and what's not with regard to making sure that people are actually doing the things that they're best at. And then it's back to equipping your managers and expecting managers to help people understand and uncover what they do best. And then take what they do best and line it up with their assignments and their jobs. And maybe in some cases do a little bit of job crafting, a little bit of role adjustment, or creating some powerful partnerships where there's a specific task that this person isn't terrific at, this person is, and they sort of complement each other and work together within those resourcing pairs. Okay, to quality. We had an interesting uptick in my coworkers are committed, colleagues are committed to doing quality work among the Gen Z folks, which is great. It wasn't necessarily a trend across the whole organization, but with quality, sometimes it's really about just making sure that there is a codified, common, shared understanding of precisely what quality means on each team for the thing that each team is trying to accomplish. So that's a great start, is putting it in writing, publishing it, posting it, making sure that people can even paraphrase it off the top of their head, and then going a step beyond that, backing up and saying from the individual level to the team level to the organizational level, how does that thread of quality expectations pull all the way through? So people not only see the piece that they're responsible for, but they see the pieces that are responsible, that others are responsible for, other teams across the organization as well. Make sure you teach them in those quality standards, make sure they're explicit, review them continually, make sure that they're top of mind for everybody, and then tie them to performance. Pick out key metrics that are really the ones you want to anchor to, and make sure those anchor your performance reviews. And then make sure thereby, and using other methods too, employees are held accountable for the quality of their work. This can involve the performance reviews, managerial coaching conversations, and then work recognition into it. That Q4 recognition is so powerful. It should be a part of all of these recommendation sets. So one of the things you want to do is tie recognition right into this one. When people are knocking it out of the park, go out of your way to recognize it frequently, not just during big company events or big whole organization events. So there's more recommendations here. Just top line on these: establish a culture of peer review, set up systems by which employees look at each other's work with a critical eye. You can form quality circles or improvement teams to address specific quality issues and develop solutions together in a room. And then make sure that leaders are always talking about quality. Make sure that we give specific examples and we tell stories about outcomes that were particularly high in quality as we measure it. That storytelling should also bridge over to telling stories about when we impact the citizenry and our end users and how our quality impacted their experience and met their needs. And then finally, best friend at work. These are some specific suggestions that I would make to your organization. But again, I would contextualize this. I would look for opportunities to do it organically as they arise. I wouldn't force the issue. And I won't read you through all of these, but again, notice recognition is a big part of this. Other things that you can do to really foster this in organic and natural ways is establish ERGs and different kinds of groups around the organization so that people can gather with others who have similar values and similar life experiences. That's a great thing that you can do to contribute to a healthy, natural evolution of Q10. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to unshare my screen, and I would love to entertain questions about these recommendations. And more than anything, I would really love to hear from the room examples of things that you have done that maybe should have landed among my recommendations, things that have worked for you.
Pretty quiet in this room, isn't it?
It is really quiet this morning.
Let's start maybe with a question.
Marlene, were you gonna share your experience? I know that you did your state of the teams planning last year.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the recommendations that you were making, Scott. We did our department strategic planning, and we had an all staff, everybody came, and we were really focused on asking folks what they think they could do in their own individual setting, or what support they needed and what they thought their team needed to do their best work. I mean, that was, I guess, the broad question. And it came at the similar time to when this Gallup survey was going out. Some people thought it was, we were sending it out. I mean, for strategic planning. So there might have been some confusion there, but it was really helpful to get the feedback from staff, very similar to what the recommendations are, just intuitively from folks saying, I thought I knew what my job was, but when I'm talking with other people that are doing a similar job, I'm not quite sure. Should we be sharing these tasks? We could share them better, I think. Having more time to discuss, trying to balance that with I'm in the HHS department, so they have very limited time. It's a lot of patient care, and they get 20 minutes in the morning for their team huddle. So how do we could make better use of our time. They put up things around recognition, and their favorite thing is to hear stories. That was the last thing you mentioned. Metrics, we have to monitor them. They're posted. Their teams see them. They talk about how do they, QA, QI every month. How do they do this and that? But hearing the story about how a patient did, or someone who came in and was so thankful for what the support they received, is so much more compelling than even seeing the outcome metrics of, controlled diabetes or something. So I just thought the focus really reflected what we were hearing from our staff kind of across the board, and wanting to recognize each other's work as well. So that's good. So I feel like they're, again, intuitively kind of seeing where things need to go and wanting to support each other more, instead of feeling like they are stressed and overworked. We could work, if we were able to have a little more time, we could do better together. So just wanted to say that for my department, and thanks for the information.
Marlene, thank you so much. And it's good to hear that some of this is very validating. A couple of things you said that I want to double down on and kind of underscore. The first thing is the storytelling aspect. That's another one of those things that gets a lot of juice for the squeeze. So if you're telling stories around all of this, you're elevating so many things, including Q8, mission and purpose, because people can hear those stories and they can say, okay, so here's something that somebody did that supports what we're all about. And they hear that story and it begins to reinforce their perception of connection to mission and purpose, and helps build your culture. So storytelling is so powerful. And the other thing that you just said that was really powerful, it's escaped me now, but I'm going to come back to it. Somebody else is going to share it while they're talking. I'm going to remember what you said that I wanted to tag into. But yeah, that was really good. Thank you so much. Others? How about we deepen with a question? Of the recommendations that I kind of riffed through, which of them resonated with you as something that you would like to try, maybe haven't done before, or maybe you want to try it a different way, or something that maybe on the other end of the spectrum struck you as something that you would push back on or question?
Scott, could you share the value proposition of investing in this kind of work for our department managers and leaders that are underwater? There's tons of projects, there's tons of things happening, there's not enough time in the day. But could you explain the value proposition of doing this work and what can come of that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's a really good one. Burnout, what we've discovered is it's not purely about the number of hours that you work. It's about how you experience those hours. The highly engaged experience their hours differently. And so they can achieve the same levels of productive participation without burning out. And so that's one of the benefits of engagement is you can work the same number of hours, experience the hours differently. You don't experience the detrimental side effects of burnout. So that's from the kind of the employee perspective. From a manager perspective, it's even easier. So as a manager, what do you care about? You care about people showing up to work, being productive, being safe, and achieving their goals. Those are those business outcomes that engagement drives significantly. So back to that first slide where I showed you the big percentages between top and bottom quartile teams, the differences are huge in things like productivity. 14% gain. If you can take a team full of people from the bottom quartile to the top quartile, just in doing so, they will become 14% more productive. And they will also experience those hours differently and not burn out. That's just one example. Did I answer your question sufficiently? Did you have a follow-up?
No, I know how you have to carve out time to do this work. And we do have the Gallup platform. All our managers and supervisors have access to their data, and you can dive into your details and see how you could make it better. But I didn't see last year that we had a lot of usage, and so just letting folks know that this tool is available, and but also if you do carve out the time, what that benefit would be for you and your team if you were able to do it.
An excellent point I want to underscore again. The best points are coming from the room. There's a little bit of a time investment on the front end. Learning how to do this does take a minute. Learning how to have a different sort of a managerial conversation does take a minute. And the platform that you described, Gallup Access, is a cheat code. That's where you go, and it spoon feeds you the what to do. It gives you the tools, it gives you the advice, it tells you the words to say and the questions to ask. So that's your cheat code. That's your Cliff Notes shortcut right to how do you get it done if you've never done it before. So on the front end, there's a little bit of a time investment. As a manager of teams myself for a very long time, I can tell you this, there comes a point at which your investment of time is no longer greater at all. In fact, what winds up happening is you spend the same amount of time that you would normally spend talking to people, you just have the conversations differently. You spend the same exact amount of time managing, it's just because of the way you're doing it, it's much more efficient in driving those engagement outcomes. And then you begin to experience the business outcomes and the increases in all your measurables on the back end with no additional consumption of your time. You do the same thing or the better thing within the same amount of time that you're already spending. How else may I be of service? What other questions?
I have one that's maybe more of a concern, but I'll turn it into a question. When you started the presentation, you showed that the participation had gone down fairly significantly, but maybe that's because of new employees and normal turnover. But we had, I think it was 14% who were not engaged at all. And if you translate that across the organization, that's 40 plus people who don't seem to, they're not engaged in your language. To me, that's a pretty significant problem. I'm wondering, we're not Google. We don't have a buffet, but a lunch. We don't have a weight room. We don't have ping pong tables. This is a courthouse that's almost 100 years old, and a lot of other buildings. So we don't have those amenities. So what might we do to bring those 30 or 40 people into the fold, so to speak?
That's a great question. I think you're referring to the actively disengaged, the people that were in the red section of the circle. Is that correct?
Yeah, not the ones that were on the margin, and some of those I suppose could go either way. But that 14% concerns me because those are real human beings. They're being paid a pretty good salary or wage, and they appear not to be interested in what they're doing or looking to move along or increase their knowledge or whatever. So what do we do?
I love the question. I don't know that you're going to love my answer. It's going to have a little bit of a sharp edge to it. Among the actively disengaged, very few can be actively recruited into even the next level up of just not engaged. When you're actively disengaged, it is really tough to get those people to be even just not engaged, let alone ultimately engaged. And becoming engaged is what pays the dividends. They become worthy of the money that you're paying and the time that you're investing in them. This is the best advice that I can give to an organization who is looking at their actively disengaged population and asking the question, what do we do? And it's a little bit harsh. Sometimes managers have to force themselves to say, I'm going to pay my precious time and attention as a manager to the people who I can move. I'm going to target that middle group, the yellow group, who are not engaged, and I'm going to pull them up into the engaged group. And that's where I'm going to put my time and energy and effort is into that group. I'm going to put my time and energy and effort into my highly engaged group even more so because those are the people, if I invest the same hour with them, I'm going to get even more out of that hour of my investment because they're already giving me that discretionary effort and they will move even further with my time and energy. So counterintuitively, the answer to your question might be to divert your time and energy and attention into the places where it's most beneficial. It can have the greatest impact.
Well, that's a good answer. I like that. So here's a follow-up on that. The 69%, I think it was, who participated, would you guess from your experience that the remaining, 31% who didn't bother to fill out this form or the survey at all, are they among that red group or something else?
It's really hard to theorize about that. If I had to guess, I'd say you'd probably have a little active disengagement, just saying, heck with that. I don't do anything around this place unless somebody makes me, so I'm not going to take this survey. Could be some of that, but it could also be the overlap of this survey with another survey that deployed around the same time. Some people might have thought maybe they're the same thing, or some people might have been confused about the purpose of this one versus the purpose of that one. Could be some survey fatigue. Sometimes, an organization who deploys, several surveys in a tight period of time, people are just tired. I took this one that had 100 questions the other day. I know this one's only got 12, but I've had enough of the survey thing. So I think there could be a little bit of all three of those. But yeah, there's probably some active disengagement as one variable among many driving that low participation rate.
If I could chime in as well, Scott, I think a contributing factor as well is what we did with the results last year. A lot of times when we don't take action and we just ask people for their feedback and then we don't do anything with that feedback, it can contribute to some of that disengagement or lack in participation once we ask them for their feedback again. So that could also be a contributing factor.
I think
Kayla, that's a really sharp observation. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I had my staff actually comment to that. I heard people being like, why would I do this? They didn't do anything with it last year. So that, and we were physically moving offices, so that probably contributed to our decline.
So So I have
It
another
gets to
question.
Q7 too, doesn't it? You think about that exact dynamic that you're describing right there. One of the best pieces of advice we could give an organization that's struggling with Q7, which you're not right now, but still I think it applies, is it's better not to run the survey if you're not going to do anything with it.
Which leads to a question for me, I guess, for the managers in the room is, how do we do something with it? How do we make this year different? What were the challenges perhaps if you were a manager that got your information but just weren't able to take the next steps with it? How can we help?
Well, that's always the quandary, prioritizing, and we all are working managers and we have so much to do, and we have people having babies and getting sick and changing jobs. So it's always carving out that time that, you know, what is the priority? And, you know, to a lot of us, we've got to get done what we've got to get done. And this is great. I mean, because I am retiring, I'm looking back at all the years of the management training, and these are wonderful concepts. But we all know we're all a little different of how we learn and how we, the question about recognition, you know, that's gone up and down over the years. And as governments, what can we do? I mean, I can't give you a bonus because you've done a great job. So how do I give the recognition? And I give the recognition that I think I would want, and that person thinks it's phony or canned, or so it's just a lot of issues and a lot of time and thinking on managers' part. And I think a lot of it's with experience. The more you do something, the better you get at it. You learn from your mistakes. You know, most of us are constantly reprioritizing all of the many things we've got to do. And sometimes it, you know, it just doesn't jump up to the top.
I can say from me, you know, I'm at the 18-month mark of being a department director, and I have been and continue to be completely overwhelmed. Just, you know, there's stuff in my job description that I never knew existed. Like when Denise reached out to me and wanted my assistance on something, I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean I have to do that? Just, you know, for the various things statutorily I'm required to do. And I guess I had expected more from the county as far as like, this is what we are going to do. Now, I know that I did miss some leadership team meetings due to my other priorities. So I guess just more conversations about like, what do various departments need? What can we do? I know I personally purchase things and give recognition to my team, because I know they can't, you know, it's not from the county, but you know, I will buy pizza or I will buy a gift or, you know, things like that, or get people to pitch in, just because that's more of that personal, you know, I don't want to have to give you a tax statement where you have to now claim this thing that I bought for you. So I don't know, for me, that's what it was, is I guess I expected more from the county to be like, this is what we want to do with these results, or maybe there was more coming. So down the road, it was like, oh, there wasn't more coming. Or maybe I missed it, because I've been flying by the seat of my pants, so.
No, that's helpful, and I think I hear from both of you more of a support in creating a process of how we take what we've all learned and maybe move through it together. Because I think what we did was we gave it to department directors and then sort of said, go forth, you know, do your, there was a name for it, Marlene referenced it, and so did you, Jody, your
State of the team.
state of the team's work. But I don't think we did a lot of follow-up and support with you on, here's what the state of the team's work is, how are you coming with that? How can you circle that back then to the broader county, as you refer to it, to figure out where is there a space that we can, whether it's through HR or BOCC, support that. So I think I'm hearing that a little bit from both of you, as well as just what we already know, time is tight. Are there other leaders that would share?
I think for us, it was just a huge transition year. So I knew for myself that there were things I was going to implement moving forward. And so implementing those things, and then saying this year, you know, that we have full participation, we're at some higher level, you know, so I know that the things that I've implemented are working. And so really kind of building those solid things. So then next year will be interesting to see what those numbers look like.
Yeah.
But you know, having regular staff meetings, talking to staff and telling them, you know, these are expectations and having those check-ins, that's been helpful for us. And so,
I know IS, ours was a very unfortunate set of circumstances. Team all got together, their one thing was, hey, we wanna take this space in our area and turn this into a workbench. By the time that we were just even talking about how to do that, we needed to make space for the DA's office. So that's something that we just were never able to do. We actually, as we're making plans to gain that space back, I have worked with us, and I think we've got a couple of workable ways that we're finally going to do that, but a year later, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It took far too long to get that recognized, and I've been working with the team, and I'm like, just our hands are tied. I know this is what you need, but so I think we're finally going to see that realized, and that may or may not have played into our numbers tanking a little bit. Is hey, we told you what we needed, and
Didn't get it.
it got worse, not better.
Right. No, that's good.
Marlene, do you have something? I see your hand is raised.
Oh, I was just talking about, or was going to talk about how we did use it. It's a lot of information, and it is the work, so to speak. Because managers were saying, I feel like staff are more disengaged. We have more people coming on. It's harder to bring them along with the common, mission, vision. Or maybe our onboarding is wrong. So it's like, okay, what's one thing? What's one thing you can do if we have this information that you think would make a difference? And a lot of it was about being heard, or just like you said, increasing the time that they have to meet with people. And we have very limited meeting time, and it costs money when we meet, as we all know. So I said, okay, for those of you who, meet with your teams once a month, or, 10 minutes in the morning. And they said, could we have 5 more minutes? And like with our little huddle time, could we have 5 more minutes with our meetings so patients start a little bit later? So we can intentionally say, what things are stressing you out, or do you feel like you don't know about? What rumors, what? And so a couple of them said just asking that question decreased the stress. Like, what's happening with literally like our HVAC system? We don't know what's going on. And they're like, put the sign on the back door when we walk in. Can we see what's happening? We don't know what's happening with when new hires start. Can you give us a little bit more of a heads up? Okay, put that in our newsletter. It'll be in a separate section. And I mean, I just kind of sent the work plan stuff to our liaison and to Jody and said, here's kind of what the managers want to do, bigger picture, but here's a couple little things that they think will help them. I don't know if it moved the needle at all, but I do know that staff feel like they have more information, even if you just ask something and no one has any questions. It amazes me. Like, just to ask it, and it's like, no, we're good. We haven't heard anything, rumors. We're good. So anyway, that was just one strategy. If you feel like you have hardly any time, is giving people a few more minutes and just saying, can you ask one question that you think will have an impact or will help support your staff? I don't know if it works for others, but it seems to be helping a little bit with us. So thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Marlene. Yeah, N of 1 at Gallup, we do this thing. Our CHRO, my boss, Matt, tends to show up to meetings, and he's got a lot of leadership courage. He'll throw the floor open and he'll say, okay, guys, rumor buster time. Let's do some rumor busters. What are you hearing? And it's a very light, casual conversation. And sometimes people don't like the answers that they get. He's really good at giving answers that people maybe don't want to hear. But just the fact that he's open to hearing those hard questions, sometimes even when they get the answer that they don't want, just the fact that somebody listened and answered the question for him makes a huge difference.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, that was great follow-up. And to backtrack just a moment back to the workbench story, I feel like that kind of speaks to what you're touching on, Scott, is that sometimes the people on our team are going to ask for things that we can't deliver on. Someone could ask for new office space, a new parking lot, whatever the case may be. And it's just not within our ability to make that happen all the time. So learning how to, as leaders and as managers, have those conversations of saying, hey, I heard you, like you had said. However, this is the reason either why we can't do that, or this is the reason why, oh, hey, it's actually going to happen next year. Just to be able to have those conversations, to follow up with people and really let them know and be honest and transparent about what's actually going on.
Keela, just to insert a step in your brilliant answer there, sometimes it's helpful when you know you got to say no to ask them a different question first and say, okay, now I think I get it, but tell me why you need that. What exactly are you trying to accomplish by doing that thing or having that thing or requesting that thing? Because sometimes what you'll discover is that there's an unmet need that could be met a different way. So you're saying no to the parking lot or you're saying no to the bench or whatever it is, but the need that underlies the request can be met a different way. So Caleb, a great response. I would just add that. Why do you want that question into the mix? Because sometimes you discover accidentally that they have a need you can meet another way.
I love that, Scott. Thank you.
Okay, we're a little bit past time, but I'm having a very good time and I'm really enjoying the conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Any other examples of things that you've done or tried?
Well, two of the projects HR worked on kind of as a countywide result, because I can see across the departments, is we were working on a recognition platform with a way an employee would get a certificate on their milestone anniversaries. What we were trying to do was develop something that was not going to ebb and flow, because we've had a presence, we've done a good job, maybe those staff or maybe COVID, there's things that would ebb and flow it. And so it was actually a emailed certificate that you could print out to take some of the work off of the department managers. And then there was a small way that you could redeem your service anniversary gift. And so it wouldn't be a gift card or anything like that, but maybe a mug or a tumbler, or, you know, depending upon what we budgeted for that service anniversary, you'd be able to go online and redeem it and it would be shipped to you, because, you know, buying 150 mugs so we could get that price point, they would do the fulfillment, they would print it and they would send it to you. So we got that all the way to demo phase. It just hasn't made it out the door yet. The other conversation we've been having and socializing throughout the agency is separating your step increase with your eval, because we're busy and we can see the ones that are late. And so there could be a perception sometimes that, you know, I'm not important. No, you've got 7 fires, maybe 8 or 10. And so you don't get that eval done on time. So your step increase could be late. So if we could separate the conversation with the money, that might have a different impact on our employees. So those are the two things. We haven't got them out the door yet, but those are conversations that we're pretty close on.
Can I please praise and validate what you just said about separating the evaluation from pay? That's one of the most fundamental recommendations that Gallup would make to any organization, is even if you have those conversations in close proximity, have them separately. That's very, very important for a ton of reasons I won't get into, but there's a lot of research that indicates that's the best possible approach. So I want to underline that point. It's a good one.
Thank you. The two other things I just kind of want to wrap around and move forward. It sounds like it's been a busy morning for everyone already before we got here at 9. We do have the ability, if a manager or supervisor, maybe you have an up and coming supervisor, wants to look at their individual data and meet with a Gallup representative to talk through that. We have made that available for individual departments. There will be a manager demo, so not just the leadership, but if your managers and supervisors would like to join in, it will help them kind of look through their data.
Scott, can you hear us okay now?
Yes, I've got you back now. Good to see you again.
Scott, before we froze, I was sharing that after this meeting, I'll send all the managers a note on how to access Gallup. I'll send the reminder that if we do only have 4 respondents or more, you know, it rolls up to the county-wide data. If you have 4 or more respondents, you can drill into your team. Sometimes you'll have divisions and you can drill down by manager. We did this year make available a one-on-one consultation available to work with Gallup. If a manager or supervisor wanted to go through and get assistance building their state of teams meeting or advice, there is a fee to that, but we'll put that information in the follow-up email, so everyone would have that information, as well as their departmental survey, so they can see how their department did, maybe compared to the rest of the county.
Fantastic.
Any other questions from the group?
So I guess my only one, Joe, would be what's the timeline? So for folks who are sitting here who may then not make the next meeting or something comes up, what timeline should they be looking for? Will be an email from you or an email from Scott?
So there'll be an email from me later this afternoon, how to get your data. There'll be a meeting about 2 weeks out. I've got to work with Kayla and her team about the scheduling, about the manager demo, to be able to go through. That will give you as a leader time to talk to your managers and supervisors about trying to make time. We also talked about recording that because schedules are really difficult to get everyone at the same time. So that would be the email today with the Gallup information and your team results while it's still fresh in your mind. And then the state of the teams, we'll get that scheduled about 2 weeks out.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Scott and Kayla, for joining us today.
More than our pleasure. Thank you for the great conversation, the terrific questions. Can't wait to watch your success as you go forward.
Yes, thank you, team. Appreciate your time today.
Do we want to do a report out for department updates?
7 minutes.
Yep.
End of the fiscal year, start of the fiscal year, audit requests will be going out to department heads, as they've already started hitting us with audit requests. Otherwise, we're just moving forward. Leah.
I don't have any updates.
Rachel.
Oh, sorry. Lots of work going into the general obligation bond prep for the upgrading the radio system. We're full speed ahead on the ballot in November, and Doug's also set up a political action committee, so we have lots of efforts happening. Still hoping the Cape Canaveral parking lot's gonna be open by the end of the month. Not sure what time yet, but construction seems to be, or is still going well there. You may have seen the purchase and sale agreement for purchasing the BLM property was posted Friday, so that is happening. The board will consider that on Wednesday. The concept is to purchase the BLM property and then relocate all of Circuit Court and the DA's office to that building, which would be remodeled. Very long timeline, very expensive. We'd be looking at a 2029 move-in date, so nothing quick there. And then reminder, on July 15th, we have the next leadership team meeting for the strategic planning process, where we continue to dive in on the focus area actions. The last meeting, we talked about the focus area preliminary actions. PSU is doing a lot of research now to flush more of the specificity out of what that would look like to present to us on the 15th. So if you haven't participated in anything so far, this would be the meeting to attend. There may or may not be a next meeting. From here, we're really kind of on the home stretch and finalizing what the plan looks like, and then they'll be off writing it, finishing the writing of it. So I can't remember what time it's at, but it's July 15th. You should all have an invitation on your calendar.
All right, the testers have done a fantastic job with our new ticketing system. we let them loose with absolutely no instructions, and not a single person had any challenges figuring out how to submit tickets. So already head and shoulders above what SysAid has been able to do. We are still getting some feedback from them and making tweaks, so don't have anything to show and share yet, but we're looking at later this month going live with that, and we've had really good comments. We've tried to have every department have testers, so thank them on our behalf. They've done an amazing job and found things that we wouldn't have been able to find, so really excited to get that changed up and move on to the new system.
We will be closed August 13th for staff training that day, so we'll do a press release here in the next couple weeks just to give people plenty of time to know that we won't be open that day. And then got a quote, did 3 quotes for digitizing our old deed books, and so we're gonna be sending off a big chunk of our deed books that have not been scanned July, August. So we'll put a press release out as well because we won't have a certain range of books for probably about 4 weeks. And that's exciting, so we're excited to do that. So then hopefully this year we'll be able to get everything online so people can purchase documents without having to come in and pick the books off the shelves, so that's exciting.
Excellent. And to tag on to what the treasurer said, it's also the end of the tax year, the 2023-24 tax year. Today we start a new tax year, 24-25, hard for me to believe. And so my office, we basically start all over. It's a new tax year, everything, it's just year after year. And the last thing I wanted to say is the LB50s from all the taxing districts, well, the LB50s, the ED50s, and the UR50s are due July 15th to the assessor. And what that is the notice to the assessor from the districts of the intent to impose a tax, fee, assessment, or charge on property. I mean, as we always say, the assessor doesn't tax, we just get the information from all the taxing districts and go from there. So that's all I have.
Us, obviously, the OAS is front and center of what we're doing. That occurred last week, and it's something we'll be dealing with for probably a couple months. Most people don't realize that everything gets done in a 24-hour period, but then there's several months of follow-up and reports, and DA's office wanting more. We need to button up different things to make it, but we're getting through it. Deputies and officers and troopers are all fine. That's the most important thing about it. But and now we jump right into the 4th of July week. So hang on.
So besides the fact that we need to do a better job at processing refunds, that became abundantly clear last week. We are busy getting ready for the 4th of July week, which is upon us. I think we've been working on this for quite a while. Staff is set, materials are out, and campgrounds were full this last weekend, they're full this next weekend, and they're gonna be full every weekend for some time to come. So it's all good, and things have been fairly uneventful. We're grateful for that, but that just shows that our team is working hard and doing what they need to do. So that's what I have this morning.
We finalized moving back into our remodeled office last week. So I'm very grateful to all the help from other people, you know, the space, and we would have gotten out of there sooner, but I literally had to do a lot of the work myself. Like I think I did 95% of building the cubicles in our new office, just due to other staffing shortages around. So juggling my time very literally between court and the officer involved shooting and like trying to find time. I literally stripped and restained our front door, which was fun because I had to work with the circuit court on when I was allowed to make noise. So it's been a whirlwind. We are down an attorney. I think our position officially goes live to fill that vacancy next Monday, so I appreciate Jody's help in trying to get that. We basically reamped our job classifications to try to get them more accurate, and I've learned a lot over the last year and a half and seen various things, so I was trying to make changes to those job classifications to make sure that new people that come in to help me do a better job recruiting. So a lot going on, and so if I look like a zombie sometimes, it's just I'm doing the very best that I can.
Well, then online Chris stepped away. Joel sent a note that he didn't have anything. Marlene said she had to step away. Commissioner Bell had to step away. How about Nick?
So we had our Veterans Festival this Saturday. We had over 250 people show up for that. It was a pretty cool event. I'm sure it made a lot of veterans summer. And we completed the first phase of the memorial, as everybody can see if they drive by that place. We're going on to the second phase here pretty soon. That's it.
Chris, do you have a report? Thank you, Nick.
So we just opened bids for 2 projects about 30 seconds ago. Got a really good bid price for Sunset Avenue in PC. So that will be going off here pretty soon. We're going to relocate the beams off of Dick Creek and put them over the Yellow Fir, which is over Tillamook River Road. Opened that bid up about 50 seconds ago. Bay Ocean will be closed during the month of August for the replacement of the Dick Creek bridge. Legler Bridge, Crystal Creek, is the one that we did the emergency bridge repair on. We're working through an engineer right now to take those beams off and put them over the Legler Bridge, which is all the way up on Highway 53. Waffle Maker retires here in September. I know we have at least 2 applicants so far. FEMA Big Trout. Been meeting with FEMA. We did a site investigation on that one. No word whether or not they're going to fund the replacement of that. Received a quote today, a proposal today to do site appraisals and potentially do relocation. So assistance if we need to. Striping starts on July 8th. So all the mechanics were out in the field, so I got to be the forklift operator removing all the beads, so apologize for running late. So 19 pallets, I ended up taking care of that. So next July 8th is when we start striping. Later in the summer, the white stripes will go. So asphalt, we're pulling asphalt out of Seaside and Gearhart right now. Possibly we'll end up pulling some out of just south of Lincoln City until we can get some of the plant operations here in the Central County resolved. So the biggest news out there is Chris Laufenmaker, after 30 years of service, will be retiring in the early part of September. Quick report.
Thank you, Chris. Commissioners?
Well, thank you. I'll give you just a couple of things. Let's see, we've already heard about the building and the radio bond. There is quite a bit going on. We met with bond counsel and also the financial people. And so that's a go when we get there, and then we'll get there very soon. With respect to the budget, you're all going to get a memo from me today or tomorrow or probably before the 4th of July that will have a worksheet attached with 25 options to consider as we roll forward. And so we're starting a series of meetings with our budget committee and with hopefully all of you, at least online, and the board. And we will sit in this room and we'll work through these options. We first may have to sort them out and say near term, long term, or realistic, unrealistic, all those kinds of things. But everything is on the table. And we'll probably make a forecast of what it's going to look like for 1 year and 2 years, and then maybe 3, 5, 7, something like that. And then look at some really disagreeable options and talk them through. And so you really, really need to pay attention because things have changed. So you're gonna get all that today or tomorrow, whenever I get it done. My computer failed over the weekend, the county's computer, I should say, and I don't know why. And I hope you're gonna fix it.
We are,
So are you saying you don't have the materials you need to effectively do your job?
Well, maybe that's it, yeah. Could be.
Too soon?
But I'm sure it'll be working to make it. Also, since Denise is retiring, I met with her two key people, Lori and Cassandra, last week. They're gonna reorganize the department because as you know, Carrie Fleischer is leaving the department as well, and she's a 20-year person for sure. And so all the key people are leaving and moving around, and Cassandra is now the assessor-elect. And so I just wanted to know what's happening. I'm not trying to second guess them at all, and you know, you weren't here or you would have been there as well, but so that's going to be a significant change for everyone. But I'm pretty confident the people there, they know what they're doing. They all have 20 years or more, 10 years, 20 years, and so things will sort out. So that's basically what's going on right now. Thank you.
So many of you may or may not know, but after the Habitat Conservation Plan conversation, there was a small table group that Commissioner Yamamoto mentioned before he left, I think, seated with the governor's staff and going through and saying, are there ways that the counties and special districts and schools can be kept whole in spite of the losses expected from the Habitat Conservation Plan? So after nearly a year of meetings that were kept completely private, that information is now coming out to the community. So the Council of Forest Trust Land Counties had a meeting last Friday that both Doug and I attended. And there are 3 options that are being placed on the table going forward. And these are options that were not necessarily things that the county said, that is fabulous, I want this. These are things that in partnership and conversation with the governor's office are things that were found to be palatable to the counties, and potentially politically viable, because of course anything having to do with revenue is not in the control of the governor nor the counties, but is in control of the legislature. So these 3 options that are being placed on the table are being placed there because politically the governor's office felt there was an opportunity for them to work. So the first one is that out of taking the revenue that's generated from the forest, keeping that revenue going as it is, but of course at the reduced rate. In option 1, the revenue goes to the county, special districts and schools to keep them whole. There is a small portion that goes to the Department of Forestry, and the Department of Forestry has to go to the legislature and ask for the remainder of the budget they would need. So that's what we're calling option 1. It's more palatable to the counties because it means we don't have to go to the legislature. However, if the Department of Forestry is not funded at the level needed to manage our forests, it shoots us in the foot as well. So it's not one of our favorites, but it is an option. There's an option 2 where the roles are reversed. Department of Forestry gets the funding they need to keep operating, but the counties have to go to the legislature and ask for them to keep us whole. Again, not one that we really like because we don't feel the legislature will do that for us. We feel that's probably the least palatable option. Option 3 takes and decouples the schools from timber harvest. So what that means for the schools, rather than them getting timber harvest, they would get equalization funding through the school fund, which is a school fund that's already set up at the state level. And so it then allows all that revenue to come back to the county's special districts to be distributed as needed. The challenge to that in our region is that we have 4 schools, 2 in Tillamook County, 2 in Clatsop County, that receive timber revenue above the school equalization limits. So right now the conversation on what is option 3 is how do we keep those schools unharmed? And they're having conversations with the Department of Education that there is an opportunity for payment in lieu of the timber funds for those schools. I don't have all the details to that yet. That is the next sort of series of conversations that will take place over this next month to figure out, is that a realistic option? The other thing that's happening that makes option 3 potentially the best political option is that the governor has already said she wants to get in and reevaluate and readjust that school equalization fund. that what's been realized is it's not working, it's not enough money for most schools, and that needs to change. So it would allow us, our solution, to be part of a larger solution, again, politically, probably the best avenue for us, because it's not just about the timber counties with something sitting in front of the legislature. We're talking about a loss of revenue across the 15 timber counties of about $20 to $30 million in the school equalization fund, which is a $5 billion fund. It's just, you know, a percentage. It's like 0.6% inside that fund. So again, it takes it so we don't have to be, as the timber counties specifically, trying to lobby the entire legislature to care about what's happening in our world. We're just part of a bigger fix. So that is the option that, assuming we can find a way to keep our schools whole, that we will be recommending going forward. I wanted to share this today because the Will Chappell from the Headlight Herald was at the meeting on Friday morning, and so I expect, if this is not already out, I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I expect that he will be writing an article relating to this. I have already spoken with the superintendents at both Nestaka and Neocani who would be impacted. I've been playing phone tag with the Tillamook superintendent, although Tillamook School District would not feel any difference. They would just get, you know, replaced revenue. So just kind of a heads up in case anyone asks you all what's going on. Nothing has been decided, nothing is being pushed forward yet. They're just options being evaluated, and hopefully by the end of July, the counties will have evaluated those options, and the 15 timber counties will be taking a vote as to what we would like to see, and then it will be in the hands of the legislature. I don't expect that if they fix it, I don't expect that we would see any revenue from that for probably 2 to 4 years, because the Habitat Conservation Plan does not technically go into effect until the 27-28 harvest year. So even though we're looking at it as today, I think there's still gonna be this delay in getting it, if they are able to adjust the equalization process, and then just getting it actually finalized until Tillamook County seeing anything back from it. So probably not an immediate fix, although it should probably be on Doug's list as a long-term piece that, as we're figuring out what revenue, you know, we'll be wanting to advocate for it through the 2025 session and see what happens. So that's the big one on the list. The other one on my list is that I want to talk just briefly about the HR department's workload. As many of you know, Jody has a ton of big projects that have been stacking up. Things like Gallup and having a time to follow up with all departments related to Gallup. The employee handbook has been sitting on the desk in HR since before Jody. We have the classification work that we're gonna be doing with Troop over the coming year to get all of our job descriptions updated, those things in place. So there are a bunch of special projects, and that's just PERS, the transition to PERS,
The benefit renewal.
which will require a whole bunch of things, the benefit renewal. So there's this long list, and I'm sharing this because I'm gonna take on a few of those projects alongside Jody. And what I want you all to be aware of is that you may occasionally start getting HR related emails from me. It's not because I am stepping in saying, as the liaison, here's my heavy hand. It's because I'm stepping in and as the liaison and saying, I'm partnering with Jody to work on some of these big projects. So I just kind of wanted that to be heads up. I know it's unusual when you get an email from a commissioner that's related to some nitty gritty detail, but if we're gonna get through this work over the next year, it's gonna take more than just Jody to do so. The other piece of that is we did offer a job offer out to an HR generalist who, after 3 weeks of thinking about it, declined it. So we had hoped that we would be moving forward faster by adding the fourth person with the skills that were needed to HR, and that person declined, so we will be reposting. Many of you know what that feels like in your own departments, when you think you're gonna get some help and in fact you don't, and so when you had really thought you were gonna start to dig out, you can't. So I just want to give a heads up again, because I know that it seems weird sometimes if you have a commissioner that's stepping in, it's not a heavy hand, it's a helping hand. So if you receive something from me, please know that and accept it in that frame. So and in addition to that, please recognize HR is running as fast as they can. They are working on meeting all of the HR needs for the entire county. So I know for each person's department, it often feels like they're not responding to you. Would you hurry up and respond? Please know they're responding as fast as they can in the order that they can for everything that's out there. And like I said, we're gonna try to pitch in and see what we can do to get some of these things done.
I will say, former, interim HR director, there's no way. It is an overload of stuff. unless
Well,
you're sitting in those
And
shoes.
Commissioner Olson's taking on some of the pension work for us as well. There's just been a backlog even before I arrived, and I probably had a 10-year work plan that I'm trying to squish into 2 years. There is progress, and we wanna make sure we keep doing great work, so I am grateful for the commissioners for pitching in and helping out.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if there's no other updates, the next meeting date and time is August 5th. If there are items you'd like to add to the agenda, please do so. It's not just an HR meeting, we wanna make it a meeting for you as well, so please use that agenda invite if you'd like to add anything. Thanks, everybody.
So you guys are all